Do you want,
Good morning. Yes, we're live.
oh, great, great, great. Good morning, Bradley Shulman, Office of Legislative Counsel. And today I'm doing a side-by-side comparison of H739 Act related to banning the use of paraquats in the state. So the first thing you'll notice in the Senate version, the proposal of amendment removes the findings. And the Senate proposal of amendment starts at the ban itself. So the section numbers are a little bit different, but the ban itself is largely the same. Oh, excuse me, is largely the same, and with the changes that are highlighted. The first change is that the Senate added berries in USDA crop group 13-07, the berries and small fruit group. So it gets your berries and strawberries. And so I had that pulled up here. And of what kind of berries and strawberries are. So you see cranberries. There's the blueberries up there. I'll scroll down to the strawberries. Yep, strawberry. And so you get those fruits.
How many total fruits are there? And there are a lot that I've never heard of.
I had not counted the number of fruits here, but there they are. Okay. So a number of fruits, but berries, great. Also. And then the effective date where you can get a permit up to November 1st, 2030 in the House bill. Your permit is effective up until December 31st, 2030 in the Senate bill. Just to change that to the end of the year. And so the permit itself, apologies. This section talks about when you can get a permit to use paraquat. So as a reminder, paraquat is banned when the bill is effective, except for permitted uses, which are orchard crops in the House version, and in the Senate version, it'd be orchard crops in the berries. So now we're talking about the permitted uses. So after the ban takes effect, you can get a permit for these uses. And here's changes to that permit process. So they're changing the date, the types of fruits. So the permit is still, once you get a permit, a farmer gets a permit, it's valid for not more than 3 years or until December 31st, 2030, whichever comes first. The House bill, it's November 1st, 2030, whichever comes first. The Senate clarified wanted to add some clarity to specifying the paraquat. So kind of the name of the paraquat, so the name and the label of the paraquat, just to add that kind of specificity there. And then they added include permit conditions that minimize drift based on drift mitigation measures identified by the EPA, require adherence to label directions to minimize applicator exposure, and exclusively limit applications to tree rows or vine rows for necessary weed control. And then so it adds an additional condition to the permit and some additional restrictions there. And I did look at the drift conditions, the drift measures for the EPA, and they are very technical. And so incorporating this by reference, gives the Secretary of Agriculture some ability to add those conditions to the permitting process without having all the technicalities into the statute. If the committee is interested, I could research those technicalities a little bit more. Suffice to say that it does, restrict the spray and the spread of the use of paraquat. And sometimes Vermont law restricts the kind of application of the use of that pesticide more specifically anyway. But this kind of puts those requirements into the permit itself.
We had a couple questions. Why don't we just finish if there's anything more that's.
And so there is not much more. They took out the study and on the idea that, I mean, I don't want to testify on behalf of someone else, but I think on the idea that farmers might be able to identify an effective alternative themselves. And then the effective dates, the effects take place, as I said earlier, the ban on paraquat takes place when the bill is effective. So November 1st, 2026. The House version is a little bit different because it has the study. And so that was going to take effect a little bit earlier to get the folks involved in the study going on that. But that was taken out of the Senate side because that's not in the Senate side. And that is the bill.
Okay, so the November 1 dates, there were a couple in our version, and the effective date is still this November 1st. Going forward in 2030, the date is just pushed back a couple of months.
Yes. So and it's just important to kind of keep those two things distinct. So the ban goes into effect November 1st, 2026, except for the permitting requirements or permitting option is in effect through December 31st, 2030.
Let's see, I think, John, you were first.
Yeah, so the universe of what's allowed for permitting are fruit orchards and berry growing.
Essentially, the berries, fruit orchards, and then the berries list that we look for, berries and small fruit list that we.
I noticed at one point vineyards was part of this, and it's somewhat referenced in the second section there that you showed us.
Yeah, you mean vineyards? Oh yeah, vine.
Yeah,
tree rows and vine rows.
Right.
Yeah.
But as far as the very specific language goes, now you couldn't use it on a vineyard.
You could use it on grapes.
Can?
And so, yeah. And so,
grapes is under the berries.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's berry and small fruit.
Yeah, I get it.
Berry and small fruit.
Kiwis.
Let me look.
I'm pretty sure I saw that on there, so.
Yep, kiwi fruit.
It's very comprehensive.
Didn't even know if we had kiwi in the state. In the store.
So Representative Nelson was next.
So I can understand the date change. The taking out the study, I thought it was really important that we had the AIB looking into this and not leaving it up just to farmers to their own device. But the AIB maybe, Heather Darby would get a crack at it and turn her expertise to it as well. And I think it's real important for the industry to get all the help they can get. The effective dates don't bother me. And as far as you're talking about drift mitigation, and Rep. Burt could talk about this as well, it's using surfactants, droplet size, the amounts we apply. When I'm out at 90 feet wide, 8-10 miles an hour, 10 gallons per acre, I'm making a very fine mist, and I have to be very, low to the ground, but I have to be very careful of wind speed for drift. Whereas if you're applying 20 gallons of water per acre, say, in a defined space, you'll get a bigger droplet size, and they use surfactants in it and drift mitigation, and it just goes right to the ground. Different ball game, totally different ball game. So I just wanted to give clarity.
Because that's something we didn't take any testimony on or hear about. Representative Boston?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have a question that kind of goes almost exactly with what Richard was talking about. Like, can we as a committee ask the Agricultural Innovation Organization that was going to do the study? Can we just ask them to do that as the House Ag Committee? Or does it have to be law in order to do that? Because I feel very strange, honestly, about taking out the study that was supposed to help the farmers find ways to adapt. And I know we have written letters to other entities before. Is that possible or not?
I think so. And I think that we can certainly, have a conversation also. I think that Richard was probably right in thinking that farmers are gonna be working on this anyway. They're gonna be looking to the agency. They're gonna be looking to UVM for suggestions, whether or not we include the study group. I mean, I'm inclined to think we were on the right track when we put it in, but I also feel like this isn't something that should hold up the bill.
Yeah, no, I don't think that either. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if we can still ask, like what we can do to help give more
Yeah,
information to the
and I think,
farmers.
I mean.
Because we've got a
all those things.
3-year or 4-year lead time.
Yeah. Perhaps, unless the product disappears off the market. Entirely. Never.
Bradley, the stipulation about tree rows or vine rows, would that include strawberry patches?
Hmm.
Fruit, it's fruit.
Yeah, it's fruit. I mean, it should include the strawberry patches, because I think that was specific testimony that the committee took, that they did want the exceptions to be able to incorporate into strawberry patches.
So if it has the language exclusively limit applications to tree rows or vine rows.
Tree rows or-
necessary, not allowed.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Well, they're listed.
It's listed in there, but that's language, not because that's language that was crafted by a large council.
Tree rows or vine rows. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure now that you mention it. So. Yeah, that is a question I can look into.
The practical. Yeah, so if strawberries don't grow on vines, and I'm not sure that technically they do or don't, but if strawberries don't grow on vines, what this is saying is that we need to back up maybe Bradley to see what's above this 1, 2, and 3 for context.
And so the authorized uses, so the secretary may issue a written permit for the sale, use, or application of paraquat within fruit producing tree orchards or for growing any crop listed in the crop group that we showed you.
Yeah, very small fruit,
Hmm.
so I think it's covered there.
Thank you.
But then a written exemption. So the last sentence, written exemption shall include permit conditions.
Berry patch could not beat that.
Well, it's a small fruit
Yeah.
and it's a
Limit
berry.
application to tree rows or vine rows. This is part of the permit condition.
Current conditions.
The way I'm reading this is that it's actually silent on strawberries. So it has to include permit conditions minimizing drift for trees and vines. But it doesn't say anything about
If you don't
other
want
ways of stuff.
exclusively limit applications to tree rows or vine
Hmm.
rows.
So it just doesn't have to have permit conditions. So I think that this number 3 is making it harder,
Mhm.
right? If you're using paraquat on strawberries, you're now going to have permit conditions that minimize drift. If you're using it on, so I'm suggesting this is my interpretation, and Bradley, you can tell me if I'm wrong here. If you're using it on grapes, you're going to have, it shall include permit conditions. But there's not a requirement that there be permit conditions if you're growing something that's not vines or not trees, so strawberries. Or, yeah, Representative Lipsky.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
But I want to make sure Bradley has a chance to digest the question, and if he's not sure, then that's fine too.
Yeah, I'm not, so I read this as include permit conditions that minimize drift mitigations identified by the EPA, require adherence to label directions to minimize application exposure and exclusively limit applications to tree rows or vine rows for necessary weed control. So I mean, I think these permit conditions, you know, there's a reading of this that the permit conditions do limit it to tree rows and vine rows, regardless of the fruit that you're growing. I mean, there is a reading of that. And so if the committee wants to add clarity to it, I think that that might be an amendment.
Next page up, go back one page.
Yeah.
Right there. For the growing of any crop listed in the U.S. Department of Agriculture Crop Guide 13-07, carry a small fruit crop on or before December 30th, 2030. So that allows it to be used in blueberries and strawberries and that. That's how I read it. It allows.
Representative Lipsky.
Okay. Just to visualize the testimony we took and the difference between a strawberry crop, which may be as high as this laptop, maybe as high as this water jug. But the runners that were coming out and the application was within inches of the target as it went along. It was shielded and it was directed. So the drift issue is pretty much mitigated. Whereas we've all been to many blueberry farms and some bushes are chest height, some are head height. I've grown raspberries and they can be waist high or chest high.
No, remember, they're just burning down what's at ground level.
Yeah, but getting that shielded direct application is superior in strawberry or easier to achieve, I believe. So I just want us to understand that there are differences between those small fruits.
Representative Bartholomew.
Just going back to the study, the Senate is so good at messing up our good bills. And I think the study is important, but also I really think that there's nothing that would preclude the agency from doing this if the farmers are needing this as a tool, as far as I know. So just because it isn't in the bill doesn't mean they can't do it. So that gives me some comfort. And I can never understand why the Senate takes out findings. I mean, this is just because they don't take enough testimony that they've never found this out, but I always find that weird. Does anybody know why the Senate takes out, every time you put in findings, they take them out?
Something to do.
Yeah, there are different points of view on that, I guess.
I mean, I feel like this language is pretty clear that if you scroll up this a little bit, Bradley. At the bottom of part C, a written exemption order under this subsection shall include.
Well, and the other,
And then even exclusively limit applications to tree rows or vine rows. So somebody putting it on strawberries could see a lawsuit
so somebody applying it to
because they would not be using it under the permit conditions.
yeah, so if they're using it on runners, that's not weed control. Arguably.
And that also is limiting this.
Yeah.
Because they're using it on runners.
So, okay, here's one way to think about this. This is not our language. Senate has proposed this language. It was never our intention to allow it to be used on strawberries or blueberries or anything else. They've added this language for better or worse. And they may or may not have realized what they were doing. We may not be clear on what it's doing. So I think that's probably where we are. Bradley, any other thoughts on this? I mean, are you feeling like you would need more time to look at it, to be,
I think Representative Burt is correct, that, the permit conditions do limit to, tree rows and vine rows. I think there's an argument to be made on the flip side too. And what does that look like if someone decides to ask for a permit for a strawberry patch and the agency denies it and they appeal the permit and then go to court and then a court determines whether or not they're using it, the vine rows or tree rows is applicable to their operation. And so I think that's what that looks like. But I also think it is correct that this bill also permits the uses that this committee passed in the as passed by version. So it does broaden it in some ways, and it doesn't restrict it from what this committee passed.
Remember, the definition of a weed is any unintended, unwanted thing growing, so. Runners and strawberries, if you don't want it, those are weeds, technically. Cornfield and soybeans popping up from or soybean field and corn's popping up from the year before because you harvested it, you picked it. And those corn plants are weeds in the soybean patch. So anything that's unintended or unwanted by definition is a weed. So runners in a strawberry by definition are a weed.
Oxford version.
But if this, I read it up above saying you can use it, and we never took testimony. We kept asking who else uses it, who else uses it. We never took testimony from, no one came forward and which was too bad. And, because they don't have a log of who uses what. So we didn't realize. So we've learned that there are some commercial, conventional fruit growers that find this as a valuable tool to them. So the Senate added it in. I think that we want to continue, but now reading that up above, then this down below, I do find these two statements conflicting.
Mm-hmm.
Robert, I agree with you that it says exclusively limit application to tree rows or vine rows. Well, raspberries are not vines, they're canes. Strawberries, you can make an argument are vines. Maybe, I don't know, but it's so, I don't know if we, the drift is a good thing. Require adherence to label directions, that's law anyways. But if we struck out exclusively limit applications of tree rows or vine rows for necessary weed control. I mean, it still says in there you can't use it as a desiccant, correct?
There isn't a limitation on using it as a desiccant, so it's just, you can use it.
Use it for anything else except.
You can use it for, you use it for these things.
yes.
We had
For weed control.
Representative O'Brien.
I think, this last 20 minutes is proof that its legislative intent is unclear here. And since we're dealing with important language there, we could make this a lot clearer.
Yeah,
And then it's just a matter of time
I don't want people to have to go to court to fight about this.
yeah.
Um,
And we all have intent, I think, that we could make very clear with change a few words.
Did the agency testify in Senate Ag on this?
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, what we, I think, should do is our next witness here,
Who's that?
Patricia,
Yeah. I don't think
in the
so.
Zoom room?
He is coming in person.
Okay, right. Well, let's I think what we probably want to do is give Bradley some instruction now, sounds like. What is that instruction? Is it to add a word to tree between tree rows and vine rows? To include something that covers strawberries?
So, I mean, it depends on what the committee does want, but now that I'm looking at this, it does, I think, exclusively limit applicators to tree rows or vine rows for necessary weed control. And so Representative Nelson is correct that it might not be able to be used as a desiccant either. And so it's for necessary weed control. And so those are conditions that would be included on any permit. And so if the committee doesn't want that, then it could strike or amend.
Exclusively limit application for necessary weed control, strike out tree rows or vine rows. Does that work, Craig?
So what would the effect of that be, Bradley?
Without a tree rows or vine rows, so it expands the scope of the use to other crops that are not growing in tree rows or vine rows.
But it would still have to be the crops that are listed
That's correct.
earlier.
Yeah.
So it's not expanding it to soybeans.
That is correct.
What if we do exclude? Yes. I only say that because we're getting into the weeds, no pun intended, in terms of what's a plant. That's part of the thing that we're trying to, you know what I'm saying? The runners coming off the strawberry plant could be argued it's not. Could be. If it's just not being used as a desiccant, then we know it's being used for purposes not to burn down the thing that we're harvesting.
Yeah, well, we were pretty clear earlier that we didn't want Richard out there with his Patriot at 10 miles an hour. 90 feet wide going, and I can see that.
Or you put a may in there instead of shall. But that could get hairy too. So we want to make sure that strawberry berry patches are given the same exemption.
I think what we probably want to do is break from this topic. When we have a chance, I know I'm not going to move right into the next subject, just so we're keeping on schedule, but may want to consult with
agency.
yeah, and find out whose language this was and what their intent was, because if we're just gonna change it and have, then that's not what we intended, we're gonna, re-amend it, that doesn't help, so. John,
Just one quick final thought. You could change it also to something like limit applications to management of the above mentioned crops, because you're not going to use it as a desiccant on strawberries or apple orchards or peas or whatever. And that would include desiccants then too.
Say one more.
yeah, John first though.
I'm not sure why we're so concerned about being able to use it in strawberries. When we passed it out of this committee, you couldn't use it in berries at all. And we're not talking about something that just is, bad to use. We're talking about something that kills people. We're talking about banning something. So I'm not worried about if someone can't use it in their strawberries personally. That we're heading towards a ban of this stuff.
Michelle.
I actually am just wondering, I mean, I know we had Bob Gray come in here and he talked about how he utilized. Charlie, Charlie Gray. So I called somebody in my district just because I did the same thing when we started taking testimony on paraquat, and they said, oh, it's only used in this one county. And I was like, oh. So then I called somebody in my county and said, what do you use? Because I heard they only use it in Addison County. And they said, we use paraquat, but only on our apples when we're growing apples. And I was like, oh, okay. So then we started to learn that actually paraquat was more widely used in Vermont. So I called the same guy back and I said, oh, you use paraquat on your apples. Do you use it on your strawberries too? Because they actually grow more strawberries than apples. And they said, no, we don't use paraquat on our strawberries. So I'm wondering how widely used it is. You know, it seemed like Charlie Gray seemed to think it was really essential for his production, but there are definitely other, because this is a conventional grower that I contacted. There definitely are ways that people can grow strawberries without using paraquat and be very successful. I mean, this is the person I contacted is like a 30 or 40-year farm business. So, yeah, so I guess I'm kind of wondering in the way that John is speaking, like, is this enough? I mean, we name berries. It's going to be phased out in a few years. I don't think anybody's going to sue one guy if he uses it and gets the permit. I don't know. I'm just concerned that if we send it back to the Senate, it's going to take so long, we may not get it back. And then we're going to have to start over.
Okay. The door opened a minute ago. Somebody looked in.
We need a camera out there.
Yeah.
Richard, a weed is a plant whose virtues have not yet been discovered.
What's that? What's this say?
A weed is a plant.
Bradley,
whose
let's do
virtues have
again
not
about
yet
an
been
hour.
discovered. That's
All right.
Emerson.
Thank you.
It's true, like you look at something and you go, oh.
Good morning. Are you our next witness?
I believe I am.
So many things.
Stay right down there. Yeah.
Trying to think of this specific one.
Right.
Thank you, Bradley.
That's what it was, land. I was thinking sheep.
This way.
Got so much lamb's quarter in my pumpkin patch.
Oh, when it's young, it's delicious. Old dandelions for anything.
You don't
Well,
need,
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Morning, Greg. Thank you for joining us. I don't think we've met, and
No.
we're unlikely to have you back in the room ever on a regular basis anyway. Maybe we can just do some quick introductions. Representative Bosland, do you want to start?
Sure. Michelle Boslin, I represent Wyndham 3, which is Rockingham, Westminster, and Brookline.
Greg Burke, I represent David Cabinet Kitchen.
John O'Brien, represent Royalton and my hometown of Tunbridge.
John Bartholomew from Heartland, also represent Windsor and West Windsor.
David Durfee from Shaftesbury, represents Sunderland and Glastonbury too.
Richard Nelson, Orleans 1, that's Derby.
Jed Lipsky, White One, so.
Jack Brigham, Franklin 8, St. Albans Town and City.
Again, I'm Greg Favor. I work with the Public Utility Commission, so
What town are you from?
I'm from here. I'm from Montpelier. So
Oh.
Good. So earlier in the session, we had some conversation about ag land. I guess this is in the larger context of land use and agricultural land, good, high quality land being converted or used for other purposes always on our mind, and particularly for solar, since there's been a real push to expand our renewable energy resources and in many cases build solar. And we took some testimony to better understand what statute says, but thought it would be helpful to have you come in and talk a little bit about how when the commission is evaluating a proposal, it looks at agricultural use, agricultural soils and.
well, that is all we look at. We look at the Act 250 criteria, which is ensuring that there's no undue adverse impact on primary agricultural soils. That would be the only nexus between agriculture and siting of electric generation. I mean, more than just solar. I mean, obviously,
Any electric generation.
yes, it would come under Section 248 of Title 30. We use basically all of the Act 250 criteria to cite those things. So it's not just primary ag soil, it's everything else, streams, wildlife, aesthetics, wetlands, you name it. All those criteria are considered when we're reviewing an application. But the only thing really specific to a farm would be the prime ag soils. And, you know, the applicant has to demonstrate that they're not having an undue adverse impact on those ag soils. Typically, if they are digging some up, they'll conserve it on site. They'll cover it with a tarp. So if and when the project gets decommissioned, they would restore
So it's physically covered with like an actual tarp.
it. Sometimes, yeah.
And I think projects have a life of 25 years.
Yes, but so in the case of solar, you know, hasn't been around that long. So they're starting to get to that 20-year mark, some of them. But they could easily re-rack the panels and upgrade them with newer photovoltaic technology and just keep the project going for another 20 years or so. So
In the meantime, the soil would still be sitting on site.
it would be preserved. Yeah, that would be a condition of the CPG. Yeah.
Go ahead, Representative Nelson.
I've driven by a few of these projects. I've seen no mounds of soil covered by a tarp. I got a feeling that soil sold for $17 a yard to landscapers or garden centers. And to be fair, in a solar siting project, you know, they bore a hole, they put in cement, they put in a pipe, they put in a stand. The simple roads they need, they're simple. They probably just put stay mat or fresh gravel right over the top of the soil. My question is, if a solar sighting's going on our precious prime ag lands, do they have to mitigate that just like a housing development will? Do, you know, is it 3-to-1, Jack, 4-to-1? 3-to-1, so if I was to sell house lots in Derby, I would have to mitigate out the value of that prime ag land. It would cost me 3-to-1, so roughly $14,000 an acre, which would go to I believe, the Conservation Housing Board, so they can buy and conserve in perpetuity prime ag land. So do the solar people have to do that? And you just said that they can re-rack these with no new photovoltaic cells or whatever to keep them going in perpetuity. That sounds like they should have to mitigate out the cost of that land, just like a developer for houses would.
So
There isn't anything like that. There is no automatic mitigation in 248.
Okay, because
I have seen some projects. I did one problem, I'm a hearing officer in some of these cases. So there was one project, it's down in Middlebury, I believe, and there was bobolink habitat in the hayfield. Bobolink? Bobolink or we go bob. Okay, we're going to go bobolink. All right.
that's an invasive species to Vermont, by the way.
That's it. We want to protect it for some reason, but anyway. So they entered into an agreement with A&R to conserve other bobolink habitat in the state. So it's something similar to that, but that doesn't happen in every case. That was a stipulated agreement that became part of the case, but it wasn't an upfront requirement.
Representative Boston.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if you know of all the solar arrays that are on, that are on flat land that could be agricultural land. Do you know, we've had testimony from people who have like sheep that go around and utilize the land, or other,
Goats.
I've gone to conferences where I've seen solar arrays, and then people they're trying to get learn how they can plant and actually utilize the land. That's not that, so that the land isn't exclusively the solar array, but it's also being utilized. Do you know how much of where the large arrays are, there's some kind of agricultural process being involved?
No, I don't. That might be something that the owner of the land or the owner of the project is allowing and doing on the side. We do have landscape mitigation requirements typically.
Yeah.
Which require them to do planting, but that's
Yeah.
mostly screening, aesthetic screening
Yeah.
around.
I mean, because like where I live in Putney is the only like big array, and it's all hayfield around the where the solar panels are.
Yeah.
And they actually do utilize it for hay, but I don't know of other examples in my area.
I know they usually, sometimes they'll use sheep or goats for mowing in between the
Yeah.
racks.
Yeah.
but Sometimes they just mow.
Yeah.
Yeah, not goats, goats jump.
You know,
Go ahead, Jim.
Chairman, on that point, we heard significant testimony. They actually get paid by the solar company to bring their sheep herds in. And because it cuts down, it's gonna cost them to mow and it's gonna cost them to graze, but the grazing has other public good than just mowing or brush hogging. So that seemed to be an expanding collaboration from the ag community.
I've seen it in some projects, but I haven't seen it in others. So
But that was really interesting testimony we heard.
Just want to back up for a second to the initial point you were making about prime ag soil. So if a project is, in a solar project specifically, if it's being built on soil that is determined to be prime ag soil, and I think we heard earlier in the session that there's a map that establishes that. So it's not somebody going in and sampling, it's. And if that's the case, is it a choice for the developer either to pay something, not 3-to-1, but 1-to-1, or is it you just have to save the soil and then cover it with a tarp?
they have to, they have to ensure that there's no undue adverse impact to the primary ag soils. Typically, they'll enter into negotiations with the Department of Agriculture because they're a party to all these cases. And they will sometimes suggest conditions to ensure that there's no undue adverse impacts.
Sometimes, but not always.
Sometimes it's fine. There's so little soil being disturbed, as you can imagine, in some cases, like you were saying, they're just boring holes.
Yeah.
And it's right off the road. There's no real driveway. They're not really disturbing that much actual soil. But in many cases, agriculture will suggest specific conditions. These land swap things, no, I haven't seen that in relation to prime ag soil.
Yeah.
Definitely the bobolink example, but others, no.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Representative Burt.
Sure. So the example you brought up of the one case where there was bobolink birds found on the land. And so could you speak to that a little bit more? I'm curious about that, and how was that something that's stipulated in section 248, and that's the reason why it triggered a process with the A&R and the agreement made?
Well, under the wildlife habitat criteria, that's something A&R is going to weigh in on, just like the Department of Ag would weigh in on primary ag soils. So when they looked at the site, they go out, do a site visit, and they say, well, this is prime bobolink habitat. So we think you need to, conserve some other land. And in that case, there was disagreement between the parties, but eventually they worked it out. And in the end, they stipulated to conserving, buying and conserving other lands for bobolink habitat.
And is that part of the PUC process too? Would you be looking at wildlife habitat?
Yes, it's all the Act 250 criteria, wildlife habitat, streams, wetlands. all of those things. Endangered species, for example, plant species, animal species.
Are there cases where you didn't give a permit for an array based on something to do with wildlife?
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some cases where I had there's a telecom case, but there's similar criteria. The developers wanted to put the telecom site directly in a wildlife corridor, a migration corridor. This is down near Stowe and Waterbury. And
Snow Hill Wildlife.
yeah. And we ended up rejecting that because the developer refused to move it. And so A&R refused to sign off on it, and we ended up rejecting it.
You realize that once that tower goes up, next year's fawn doesn't know that hasn't been there for 1,000,000 years.
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
You put that tower in this year and the fawn born next year doesn't know that that tower hasn't been there 1,000,000 years. It's just another tree in the forest. Some of these things I find incredibly silly. We will worry about the bobolink, which there's thousands of acres of bobolinks habitat in the state of Vermont. Just depends on how you crop your land. But we don't worry about our dwindling supply of prime ag soils. And there's only so much of it, and you just don't make it. And but we'll worry about the other things.
Not sure. who was-
Follow-up question.
Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, asking.
I'm sorry, Chair.
Okay, Rick, yeah. Or I'm still hearing this. Yeah, so along those same lines, so there have been cases where because of wildlife habitat corridor, something to do with wildlife, where the PUC had a decision that, where they had to do something with regard to that. Are there any cases of that with farmland?
Not that I know of.
Is there a reason for that?
Typically, in my cases, my experience, and I've been there a long time, they come to an agreement with the Department of Agriculture on how to fix it. Either avoid that prime ag soil or conserve it in some way that's meaningful. There could be a buyout of other land, something like that as well. But in my experience, I don't recall anything being rejected just for that
So
issue.
you would only not issue a permit if the agency of ag made a clear case that.
If they objected and said this will have an undue adverse impact on prime ag soils, it'd be very difficult for us to approve that application.
So undue adverse impact, and that's the agency of agriculture that's making that
They'll
evaluation.
weigh in, yeah, they will definitely weigh in if they think it's going to have adverse alone. If it's just going to be adverse, they're going to definitely take a look at it and then say you need to do X, Y, and Z in order to ensure that it's not an undue adverse impact.
President Brigham?
So when we're doing hearings involving prime ag, it's all the Department of Ag determining that soil mitigation.
And you're speaking from your experience as an Act 250.
And I believe what you're talking about, the 9 criteria, that's Act 250. Going through the project. Now, there's been 2. One was built over my border 5 years ago in St. Albans and one on top of the hill. And they're not in the best of ground. So that wasn't a,
Across from the Abbey Hill.
yeah, that's in pretty good ground. And I don't know what went on there, but
That's not your commission.
yes, it would have been, but I think, if it was done as a minor, see, when COVID came in, all the hearings stopped and everything went in as a minor, so, if the coordinator met all the stuff, And there probably was mitigation there. I'm quite sure.
Yeah, I'm getting all flat.
Did you have anything?
I did.
Yeah, Representative O'Brien.
So just to be clear, what we're talking about is a certificate of public good, right?
Exactly, CPG, yeah. I'm
Right,
sorry, I
so-
should have explained that.
But you're using a lot of the same permitting triggers, right, as Act 250.
Yeah, it's imported directly from Title 10 to Title 30. Now, there are some differences, but basically the same criteria.
But the environmental board doesn't get involved. It's really the PUCs that's listening to the same
That's
criteria.
right, that's right, because for electric generation, it's just us.
Right.
We can get appealed to the Vermont Supreme Court, but it doesn't go to the environmental court or the environmental board, no, nothing like that.
Right. But it's interesting you're borrowing their sort of triggers too, though, right? But
Yes.
what I was wondering about is, it seems like according to the PUC and maybe because of what you're doing with solar specifically, is that it's not destruction of prime ag soils, it's just sort of putting it on pause, for example. So there's not mitigation required because in the eyes of the PUC or perhaps the developer, at some point that could always go back to, I mean, if the prime ag soils are still there, it could go back to farming, right? That's the thinking involved in this. So I was wondering on like land use or conserved easements, considering it's, that have to stay in agriculture, you put arrays on that because it's still considered to be prime ag soil?
Would you,
Say you have a farm that's conserved with the land trust as an easement for, 100 years, it has to be agricultural. Can you still put an array on there with?
I don't know how that would work. If you tried to pull it out of the trust, I don't know.
Or could stay in the trust if the prime ag soil is still there essentially?
I don't know. I'm not sure. That wouldn't be our call.
Okay.
That would be the land trust call.
Well,
If it's still qualified. I don't know what the restrictions would be on that.
Yeah.
Representative Brigham.
My farm's conserved and it states in here, no solar.
So it's in the easement. Interesting.
Not sure who is next, but go ahead, John.
You mentioned covering the soil with a tarp, if there is soil to preserve. I don't know of any tarp that's gonna last 20 years. Did anyone go out and actually see, are there sites that have actually done this? And does anyone actually go see if in 15, 20 years, if that soil's still there and covered by a tarp?
Well, you're required to conserve it. And if you violate the terms of your CPG, you could get in trouble. We can fine you, we can revoke your CPG. So you want to follow the conditions of your CPG. Now, obviously, the TARP thing is for very minor, minimal impact on prime ag soil. And again, it's something that Department of Agriculture would accept or reject as a means to mitigate any impacts on the soil.
Okay, but what about checking to see whether you're getting in trouble if you speed down the highway, but only if somebody checks.
It's true. We don't go out and check. We don't have that kind of manpower to go out and do that.
Representative Lipsky.
I have a lot of lived experience with piling topsoil. Never used a tarp, but every pile that are still existing, they are weed or sod, and you could have a windstorm, you could have anything. That's a permanent mound of weeds until you get ready to use it, sell it, or
So it's gonna stay intact because of.
they stay intact.
Yeah.
Putting a tarp, whether it has PFAS in it or not, is not necessary. It's not necessary. Within hours, that's gonna get green, and yes, there'll be yellow. Thing called goldenrod, they'll emerge up there. It's a vast, complex plant. Maybe.
Representative Brigham.
Yeah, so in your construction, if you're disturbing the earth anyway, within 24 hours, it has to be mulched. or seeded in mulch, a pile of topsoil or any,
For Act 250?
or any construction you're doing. Although if it's a cornfield, that doesn't apply. You do, you know what, the silt fence, that's all out the window if it's already a cornfield. But if you're tearing up sod to do something like a solar array, any development, there's a whole Vermont law book on seeding and mulching with it. You know, in the towns, we have to do the same thing. If we're doing a ditch.
Yeah.
Gotta be seeded and mulched that day.
Representative Burke.
So I think there's a little bit of concern that agricultural soils are one thing, right? I believe the word's primary agricultural soils in CUC. It's not just prime.
Primary ag, that's the criteria, yeah.
What is, I have a few questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do back to back, but so what is the definition of primary versus prime?
I don't know. I don't know what that is. I know
In the
that,
Department of Ag, you can see.
like,
There.
there's a map and it'll map primary and then less secondary soils. I know there's gradations or gradations of it, but I'm not an expert in soil.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Is there any, so I see, when I hear of A&R weighing in on a situation where there's a wildlife habitat corridor.
Mhm.
It means that it's a corridor, which means that the wildlife passes through it, right? It's not wildlife habitat, it's a corridor. If that's the word, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's a little of both.
habitat corridor, yeah, it might be getting into the same thing, but to me, it signals, the activity of the wildlife being hindered.
Yep.
And the A&R is in on that, and the PUC responds to that, it sounds like.
Sure.
Is there any concern within the PUC that maybe agricultural activity should also be included, not just agricultural soils, in looking at whether or not to allow a certificate of public good? And would
It's interesting.
the agency of ag be able to weigh in on that?
Well, I mean, the agency of they could weigh in on something like that. It's not definitively a criteria. So they would have to make an argument that, hey, this is pretty closely related to conservation of prime ag soil. They could certainly make that argument in a case. Just like a neighbor could make any argument they like. I mean, we have hearings on this, and then everyone brings all of their arguments, and then everyone responds to everyone's arguments, and then eventually we make a decision. But nothing would prevent the agency of agriculture from doing.
Maybe you can speak to this, but when I hear the word agricultural soil, I think it's soil that's farmed.
Sometimes it's soil that was farmed many years ago. It's just a vacant hayfield.
Right. Or the potential to be farmed.
It could be farmed in the future. Yeah.
Or a slant.
I think some of the testimony we took was surprising on the amount of the state that is
That was
classified as primary.
That's quite a bit.
Yeah.
Quite a bit out there, just like quarries. There are a lot of quarries in the state. You'd be surprised. A lot of quarries.
Representative O'Brien.
I just wondered if there's some of the same criteria for forest, like, if it was 100 acres, could I clear cut a forest to put in a solar installation in that? I remember the former commissioner of FPR said, even when you clear cut a forest, it's still a forest, for example, so that in that way, right, it hasn't changed. And potentially, I think, I bet even up to 20 years, it would probably come back as a forest pretty quickly if you decommission the solar, but I didn't know what the PUC, what guidelines you use on that.
Again, you're going to look at wildlife habitat. You're going to look at erosion, wetlands, endangered species. So the less you clear, the better as an applicant, obviously, because you're going to run into problems. If you're clearing that much, it's likely you're going to run into problems with wildlife habitat, deer wintering yards. And then A&R is going to come in and say, wait a minute, you got to, set different boundaries, can't clear here, you can clear here,
Right.
That's a lot.
Interestingly, then it almost incentivizes solar arrays being in
cleared areas.
cleared
It
areas.
absolutely does.
Farmlands.
Yes, that's the prime spot you want to be. The less clearing, the better. I mean, obviously, it's less money too, because you're just driving posts into the ground. It's not a whole lot you need to do. So yeah, you want to locate in an abandoned hayfield if possible. That would be
Shaftesbury would qualify as that. I mean, was farmed, right, at some point.
Was farmed, was hayed, yeah. Actually, and you might not be able to talk about this, Greg, but there's and you might not be able to talk about it because there was a comment, there are several comments filed within the past several days, and nothing to do, it's in Shaftesbury, nothing to do with a project that is proposed and issued as CPG that hasn't been built yet, but an existing project where over the winter in bad weather, some of the panels were torn off by wind from their moorings and broke. And a neighbor saw it, or maybe it wasn't a neighbor, maybe even somebody else saw it, but eventually somebody filed a comment saying they were concerned about bleaching or some damage to soil because broken panels were now on the ground.
Right.
And the agency actually filed a response yesterday. Ag
Oh, okay.
and ANR also filed a separate response, and
To who?
in EPUC. So
To us.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I'm not aware of that. But
okay, good. Well, that's why I was saying maybe you can't comment on it. And if you're not aware, then it's probably okay. I think Public Service also filed a comment, so you can see all of them. But so this is sort of a different situation because the soil wasn't disturbed in the construction of the project, but the concern that's being raised is the soil may have been impacted by now no longer intact equipment that is now in the ground. So I'm wondering from a technical standpoint, is that a violation of the certificate to have non-functioning broken material?
Oh, technically, yes. Everything's supposed to be constructed as to the diagram you present when you apply, right? So if it's different, it's out of compliance, right? So what we would do in a case like that, generally is if someone sees something like that and they file a comment with the PUC, we will send that comment out for comment to all the other agencies as well as the petitioner to see what the remedy is or should be. And then based on that, we'll go forward, whether it's an investigation, whether it's a fine, what have you. That's the typical process, though. Folks would file, then we'll ask for comments from everybody else to see what the recommendations are for going forward or something like that. But if it was something, a windstorm, something they couldn't prevent, you have to take that into account as well.
Is wind ever considered in siting approval? So a solar panel on the top of Mount Washington, for example, might not be a great idea because of the wind. Is that something you have to consider?
You have to consider public safety. Yeah, that is a criteria. So if something's going to blow over, so in a case of wind turbines or a telecom tower, people often have concerns that the tower might blow over in high winds. So it's something we take into account when we're looking at,
It's too windy.
what's that?
If it's too windy, so it's counterintuitive. If it's too windy, could be dangerous.
Yes, for a wind turbine, yeah. But they put in safety features to mitigate that. So those are all things we look at.
Didn't you show me a photo that they thought they'd collapsed in snow too, like very heavy snow?
Yeah, it turns out it was
Yeah.
probably wind.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a notion of act of God, when things happen and during a phase of climate change, we were experiencing more severe, whether it's rain, higher volumes over shorter period, and the wind events in an adjacent Shootsville Hill are extreme and flattened, or like microbursts in the last decade. But I'd also, it's not off topic, but it has to do with the siting for public good. That was a telecommunication tower. I sat on the land trust board and was the only vote that supported that tower for public safety. That would have brought cell service to Nebraska Valley, Barnes Hill, Valley of the Shadow of Death, where I go out to work and logging, and if you got pinned, you were dead because you didn't get reception until you got out to one's little intersection in Moscow. So that was, you capitulated, but that was because of high density of activists, conservationists that had a million reasons why that tower was devastating, but it really served the public good.
I
It's
don't
still
know what,
a dead zone of
where is this?
Shootsville Hill on the Stowe. It was in Waterbury on the.
Oh, the one on the border. Yeah, that was because of the
Right.
wildlife border, yeah.
Well, it was because of the outcry from.
No, it really wasn't. I was a hearing officer in that case. It really centered on the wildlife corridor. If they had moved it 10 yards, it would have been fine. They would have moved it out of the corridor, but they refused to do so. I really thought that project could go forward.
You still can't, every time I go anywhere near there,
Yeah,
you get dropped.
yeah, that's it. That's a shame.
Shadow of death. We're gonna call them now.
Let's see if we've got
this.
one more question that's more on topic here.
Just wondering, does the PUC involve itself in suggesting sites, or is it only responding to proposals for sites? Where I'm going with that is, one of my pet peeves is why put these things in prime ag soil until we've covered every Walmart parking lot and every warehouse. How do we get the panels in more logical places?
Well,
PUC involved us over that, or do you just respond to, we want to put it here?
yeah, we respond to applications to see if they comply with the criteria, obviously, but you folks obviously could put in different criteria.
Bartholomew bill, like the Burton bill.
I mean, that's all up to you guys. You could say, look, we want siting here. We don't want it there.
Quarries, is there something in the statute that says quarries should get priority?
What?
Abandoned quarries, because you had mentioned quarries and just.
Yes, there are areas for certain types of installations where, and obviously and that has to do with the net metering, adders and subtractors. So I don't want to get into that, but we try to push things towards gravel quarry, for example, for net metering at higher rates, but that doesn't pertain to every solar installation.
Also wanted to comment on something, I wanted to correct something about bobolinks that was said earlier. It's just for the record, and that is that they're not invasive. They migrated from the west naturally as we did more agricultural soil, and an invasive species is pretty much defined as an introduction that's likely to cause harm to the environment, economy, human, animal, or plant health. So I would argue that the bobolink is not invasive, but belongs here.
It's not a weed.
Just for the record.
It's not a weed.
Okay, no, non-native.
Well,
Either a weed.
they've been here a couple of hundred years.
Yeah.
So how long have they?
Exclusively.
In Vermont, I think even a human for a couple of hundred years might be considered a Vermont.
I'm gonna call a point of order here
Uh,
and ask that you confine your questions and comments to an ag related.
Yeah. So to me, on these solar sightings, and I think of the one in Sheldon across from the Abbey. And that field is just as flat as the floor in this room. Well,
A little bit of this.
not much.
That's flat.
You know, and
You try playing all
And-
on it.
you know, I always say, you know, if I can run the big bendy tractor on it, it ought to be firm. And, you know, a lot of farms have these south facing slopes, hills and stuff, especially you get up in the kingdom. That are a great place for solar because you've got that exposure to that southern winter sun and, you can't, you know, people don't pasture cattle like they used to anymore, but you could sheep the hell out of them after you put the solar up. And, you know, I realized the benefit to these solar sightings. I don't know what they're paying right now, but some of them are $2,000 an acre per year. They're paying to the landowner.
It's lucrative. I was
You-
approached.
You can't, there's no. Well, we allow too much marijuana to be grown in this state now for even that to make that much money per acre. I mean, that's just, it's a crazy amount of money per acre that can be generated off of these solar sites. So I understand, and you know, on $18 milk in today's world of everything's more expensive, like, you know, I mean, corn. In today's market, you're lucky if corn will make you $200 an acre. Clear. And I don't even know if you can right now. I don't even know if you break even. And so I understand the lucrative of it, but does it pay? Is it really? Does it pay back enough to cover their carbon footprint? Does it pay back enough to justify the added cost of the electricity, having this solar? I like what the St. Pierre's did at Pleasant Valley Farm with their big methane digester and capture and all that. You worked on that project, I'm sure, or your agency did.
Oh, yeah, our agency.
And, you know, in the amount of hassles they went through to do that. The company that did it does them in a lot of other states. They said they'll never come to Vermont again. That's a shame. That's a shame. And I don't know, I don't believe it was because of your agency that they won't come back to Vermont again. What's that?
It might have been, but there are criteria and we enforce those criteria. You folks make the
Yeah,
criteria.
okay, thank you for that. Maybe that's something we should look at to consider more cogeneration from the materials that we have at hand, like methane.
I just have a follow-up on.
Okay, yeah, I think Representative Brigham had a hand.
It's just scratching.
Okay, go ahead, Representative Bryan.
No, I thought,
You do that something.
the follow-up to this, which we've never had in, would be who at the agency of ag say when they're a party to these discussions, like
Yeah.
what criteria and what thoughts they have about.
Yeah, Patricia, could you make a note of that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a lot more to, I think A and R has a lot more, but ag goes way in, so it's interesting.
Yeah.
Like the Abbey project.
Yeah, Representative Burke.
Just curious about, have you, well, first of all, just have you had experience with, roof mounted projects on like, say, a box store, like Walmart, or what is your experience with that in terms of You know, is that something that we could try to shift policy toward easily, or what are potential barriers for that? Is the roof system, you know, are they oftentimes, not able to hold the weight? Is it, what are the reasons why we're not heading that direction, and what can we do to head that direction?
We are, there's tremendous incentives to build on a roof. We just don't have a lot of roofs. There's a lot of residential, but as far as large, I don't know, factories, corporations with large flat roofs, it's Vermont. We don't.
I know one that's 999 feet long, the southern exposure.
Yeah.
Are you say that there aren't many roofs so, are most of our box stores covered then?
Certainly a bunch of them that I've had experience with, but there are tremendous incentives to do net metering, and that's what a box store would do. Typically, a roof mount is net metering,
Yeah.
and you get a much higher rate for your power. The solar plants out in fields, they're typically the large ones at least. They're typically negotiating a contract with the utility, so it's a different rate. It's lower than net metering. So there is an incentive to do that. It's up to folks to take advantage of that and, pencil out the economics of it and see if it works for them.
It looks like more often than not, between the cost of construction. Or else, still, it's like farmland is chosen as the prime spot for.
If you're going to build a large project, if you're going to net meter, a rooftop is great. But again, net metering only goes to 500 kilowatts. So if you're building something in the megawatt level, 5 or 10 megawatts, you got to be on the field somewhere. Because you need the space, you need the acres of land to do that. So
Are there triggers for like incentives from whether it's the federal government? I don't know about the state level, maybe you can speak to this, maybe you can't. Is there a reason why they're trying to get to 5 megawatt because of an incentive? Financial incentive from, say, the federal government or others?
there are
That large, I see, for me, 500 megawatt might be smaller, but if you have 20 of those.
500 kilowatts.
500 kilowatt might be smaller, but if you have a lot of those and you have this efficient system for making those happen, and you get paid higher levels for net metering, it
Right.
seems like that would be the common stories. Oh, there goes another one on the rooftop, but the common story we're getting is there goes another one on the farm field.
Well,
So-
we see both. We see a lot of net metering, and we
Sure.
also see ones in the farm field. The reason the contract with the utility is because the utility is incentivized to buy renewable power. Again, you folks have incentivized that behavior. So the utility needs to fill a quota for their renewable energy. So as a developer, I want to fill that quota. I can build a 5 megawatt in the field and know I'm going to get a contract.
So stability, financial, it's a lower risk to know we're going to get that contract.
You're going to get it, yeah.
Essentially, the legislature
It
has
says
created that system.
exactly. So there's various incentive programs. There's net metering, the standard offer, which is kind of ended. And then you have the regular folks contracting with the utilities.
Right, let's take one more question. Yeah.
With the change in the federal government policy, are you seeing less permits right now, less applications?
I think that'll trickle through in about a year. I'll know better in a year whether it's really impacting.
All right, I touch upon the Lowell project, but I won't go there.
That is a open case.
Yeah,
I am the hearing officer in that case too, so I really can't talk about any issues. I mean, if you want to know procedurally where it's at, I could tell you that, but
yeah, it's, that's also the best land in Lowell, arguably.
pretty flat.
Pretty flat
out there.
Good soils.
Well, it was snow covered when I was out there, so I couldn't tell, but
Lowell, right in the village,
Right across from the burnout.
right beside it.
Yeah.
Right behind it, yeah.
Good, thank you for making time and.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you,
this morning, yeah.
really.
That's
Thank you.
helpful.
Great talking to you guys. Yeah, if you ever have any more questions, I suggest you hear from Agency of Agriculture, A&R.
Yeah.
To fill you in more on these details, and